Hey everybody, it's Mr. Sanchez. We're back today with a little bit more on the Renaissance. But before we begin that, just want to go over again a couple of announcements, making sure that we're all on the same page. Be sure that you have filled out the attendance assignment from last week. You can find that under the classwork tab in Google Classroom, and it's attendance week number 2. Okay, we got to get this number a lot higher. Again, today I had a bunch of kids, students come into the live lecture, which is great. So if I'm repeating myself, and it's okay, the more times you hear it, the better. But this has to be done, guys. This is not something that Washington Middle School has decided to make you do just to make your life a little bit harder. This is something that the state of California is demanding every single school do right now as we do our distance learning. Okay. The schools get funding from the state based on the amount of students that are attending class. Okay, that means that when you're in the seat, the school is receiving the funding that goes to you guys for books, for supplies, for anything you can think of that costs money. That's where the school gets it from. Now, that is not the case right now because there are no seats for you to be in. So the only way the state can justify sending money to the schools and having them use that money to buy Google Classrooms, to keep your iPads up and running, to get the programs from Edpuzzle to everything you've done. They just need to make sure that you have access to the stuff that the teachers are doing, not just for history, but for every subject. So you have to get this done. And it's a simple form. You click on that and you just answer the question, yes or no. It's not worth any points. And bam, you can help out everybody, the school. Otherwise, it'll appear that the students are not attending school or do not have access for it, and then the repercussions could be pretty substantial for us down the line, which every single one of you are coming back next year to Washington Middle School, so this affects you very, very much. The second announcement was today. Yes, we did a live Zoom session. It was kind of cool, a little strange. I was talking to people live and I didn't hear anything back because I had muted them. I didn't want people to talk over each other or make distractions. So it was a little strange, but definitely I think was productive. And that's kind of what this video is going to be. It'll be a little bit of what we went over today. And then also I'll try to go a little bit faster so that we can get at least half of this chapter done and we can begin doing a little bit of a deep dive. I think you'll find that there's a lot of options that you'll see today that you could do a little bit more research in, kind of like we did with the China inventions, where we read a bunch of different ones and then you picked one to go into a deep dive and present it to the class. So we'll do something like that with these different areas of the Renaissance. I will post the link to chapter 29. So if you don't like the lecture or if you want to read it on your own, it will be available to you. That's kind of what we did. We kind of read the textbook together and then discussed certain points. So that's what we'll do today in this video. When you're listening to today, you don't need to necessarily take notes or anything. We're going to do a bunch of stuff with that moving forward. If you do want to take notes, I can give you extra credit. You just need to take a picture and email it to me. I'll give you a couple extra credit points for taking notes. Remember, I've said this before. I'll say it again. That's kind of where college is for students. It's you go and listen to the teacher talk, and you write down the things you think are going to be important to remember, and those notes come in handy when it comes to midterm and final exams. So it never hurts to practice writing down notes, and if you do, I'll give you some extra credit, but there won't be an assignment or anything tied to that for today. Just want to kind of break down chapter 29 as we will dive into it deeper as we move forward this week. All right. So chapter 29. This is going to focus on the city of Florence. Florence is a city in Italy, and I'm going to get that out for you here. This is our English stuff. So when I look for Google Map of Europe, bring that up. That up already. Okay. So when we take a look at our map here, Italy is again right in the center, and this is going to come up again as we go through today's lecture. But here is Italy. Florence is a little bit kind of right where the Italy is on that map. And we are talking about Europe again. Now, when we look at the Renaissance, remember what Renaissance means. It's a rebirth. It's a revival. It's going back to the good old days in a simplest sort of way. You have to remember that these are the period immediately following the Dark Ages. We're talking 1300, about the start of all of these Renaissance ideas that are going to start to be forming. So for about 1,000 years, if you go back to the end of the Roman Empire to 1300, you have what, again, historians had deemed the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. It was a time where human thought and science and mathematics in Europe stalled. It was not progressing at the same rate that it had been doing before and after. So Rome and Greece, again, Rome, the Roman Empire in Italy, Greece, the Greek Empire, they were very, very good at creating advancements throughout their time. Once those two civilizations ended, we went through what we talked about the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, and there wasn't a lot of things happening besides religion. Religion was the main focus of nearly everybody in Europe, and Renaissance starts to break that sole purpose of life, if you will. So yes, religion will still be important, but it won't be the only thing. You can do other things besides thinking about God 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I also want to remind you that the Dark Ages takes place in Europe. Okay, during that same time, if we take a look at where we were at in Islam, right, they were having the height of their empire from the 700s to 1300s. They were as good as they will ever be in terms of an empire, taking land everywhere you see my mouse kind of going. And they had huge advancements in mathematics and science, not to mention their religion was still very important, right? It's what unified the entire empire was their religion. But the fact is they still had other things beyond religion that was advancing at a very, very fast pace. Kind of the glory days of the Islamic Empire happening at the same exact time. We consider this to be the worst time in European history, the Dark Ages. Don't forget China, the inventions we saw in China. It would take centuries to move over to Europe because of the lack of humanism. And we'll talk about that term more today as well. Japan as well. These were civilizations that were exactly at the same time that they did not experience what we would consider to be the Dark Ages. They were having a height of their empires. So Florence, right? Florence, as you can see here, oops, that didn't work. I wanted that picture up. There we go. Florence is what we consider to be the birthplace of the Renaissance. And you'll see here this river. This is going to be important because it is going to be what allows Florence to be the center of this Renaissance. And I'll explain that a little bit here further down. Okay, so, and you'll be reading some of this, what I'm saying, you can read it in this chapter. You'll get kind of what we're talking about right now. Okay, so Florence is at the center of Italy, which is at the center of Europe, really. It really is very much in the middle. And that river allowed you to get access to the Mediterranean Sea on the side of it. Okay, so you see Florence here, you have a river as we scroll into it, right? This river goes right through the city. and will flow to either side. It's called the Arno River, and it's going to flow to the Mediterranean. Once you're in the Mediterranean, then if we scroll out even more, you have access to France, you have access to Spain, you have access to the Islamic Empire in North Africa, you have access to the Mid East in Turkey, Istanbul, remember Constantinople. There you have Northern Europe within reach as well. So this is really like, if we just scroll out, you can see how it's kind of right in the center of Europe. So that alone, the proximity, makes Florence and Italy in general a really, really great place to start this revival. Now, why though does the revival even start? That's what we need to explore in more detail today. So, banking. As boring as that may sound, that's where the birthplace of the Renaissance can get its original start from. Banking. Yes, the same type of banking that you're thinking of today, where you go, you can store your money. You can, if you want to go to another place and transfer the type of money you have so that you can buy stuff, in France, you can do that at banks. You can take out loans from banks to buy property, to build things, to do all sorts of stuff in terms of large sums of money that you may not have. Today, same thing. We buy our cars through banks. We buy our houses through banks. It's all that. So money is there in the banks. And that is the industry in which this very famous family, the Medicis, are acquiring their wealth. It's through banking. So that's about as much as I need to say about it. It's not much more exciting than you might think. It's banking. That's what makes them so rich. You just need to worry about what they did after they became so very wealthy. As you could probably imagine, right? When you have all of that money, you want to spend it. You want to use it and take advantage of the fact that you're insanely rich. And at this time, that's kind of where they were headed. They didn't have art that they could go out and just purchase because it hadn't been created yet. They couldn't just go purchase these sculptures or listen to music because none of that had been produced yet. It wasn't being made during the Dark Ages. So the Medicis would what we call become patrons. All right, patrons. Patrons are people that are going to pay other people to, usually in this sense that we're talking about, create artwork or create music or create something that the person paying wants to get. And with this in the Renaissance, we're talking a lot of artwork and a lot of, as we'll see, architecture and literature down the line. Now, that's pretty simple. If you have money, you're going to try to hire people to make you beautiful things. That's not crazy to figure out. But what is going the next level of understanding this is that once you start paying people to create these things for you, you're going to want the best of the best, especially if you have a lot of money. So the artists out there will realize, oh, if I'm really good at creating a painting or creating a sculpture, that I can get paid a large sum of money. So they would almost start competing to be even better. And then what happens is that the person that has that big urge to be the best and then also is insanely talented, gifted, just naturally talented, those will be what create the masterpieces that you still would recognize today, like the Mona Lisa or the Sistine Chapel, the Statue of David. These types of things will become classic, priceless things, timeless masterpieces of the time. And so, again, like think of it this way, if I may really, really like drawing and I might be dedicated to being a really good drawer. Like I want to draw something. I'll practice and practice and I might get pretty good at it. Pretty good. But if I don't have that natural talent, just that ability for my mind to translate what I want to my hand in a way that creates exactly what I'm looking for, it's not in the cards. Some people, like Michelangelo, like Donatello, Da Vinci, these guys had the drive and they had the natural talent. And so that's when you start to see these masterpieces. And then, when we look over our map here, right? So we have a bunch of rich people in Florence and all throughout Italy, really, that are hiring artists to come and create masterpieces for them. All right. And then, so let's say you're in France, you're in Paris, France, a huge city now. It's definitely one of the biggest in Europe. And you're starting to hear about these wonderful things that are happening in Florence. And in good old Paris, we don't have quite the same artwork and the same masterpieces being created. So what do? Well, if you have money, you go to Italy, you go see these things, you go pay to see them, you go pay to have them make them for you so you can take them back to Paris. Same thing if you're from Belgium, if you're from England, if you're from Spain, or if you're struggling here in Paris, you're not making any money, you are looking for a way to support yourself, but you happen to be really good at being an artist, you might travel to Florence. Same thing, you're from Barcelona, you're kind of good at sculpting things, but nobody in Barcelona is paying for that. They're paying for it though in Italy, you're going to go to Italy. So these artists and these rich people are both going to Italy, creating a hotbed of thought. And then, once that starts going, they start, competing with each other. They start, if you've ever noticed, you do your best work really when you're working with someone else on a big project, right? So if your best ideas often are not something that come from just you, they're from talking to other people. Oh, you know what? You give me an idea. And that's kind of what's happening here. These people are challenging each other. They're competing. They're always socially together. And they're bringing, as it says right here, new ideas, goods, and technologies that are going to even further enliven this city. Okay. Finally, we have to remember this term again, humanism. I'll put it here in this one for you as well. Humanism. This is a difficult concept to gather as a 13-year-old. It's the idea that the human mind, the human person, is capable of doing great things, that they are able to solve problems, that they can work together and create masterpieces, not just in art and in architecture, but in science and in mathematics and even in religion and anything, that a human is a very powerful source of intelligence. And celebrating that is okay. That celebration is called humanism. So think of it this way. Before the Renaissance and before the 1300s, if something was beautiful or if you wanted to explain something, it was pretty easy how you did that. You just said, well, God did it, right? Or God made it beautiful, or God is responsible, and that was the end of it. You didn't need another explanation. You didn't need anything to actually have the human mind be challenged or achieve its greatness. But this new idea kind of says, well, God may have put us on here, but we humans are really capable of doing whatever we set our minds to, whether it be in religion or whether it be in science or math or art or music or anything, that the human needs to be celebrated. That's why you'll see a lot of these statues of the human body, naked, or very, showing the muscle tones, showing what a perfection might look like at the time, or classically even. And that's why just a statue of a person, like you'll see here, the statue of David, is just a guy, right? But when you are celebrating humanism, the idea that the human being is an amazing entity, is an amazing person, amazing being, that's when this starts to take a deeper meaning. The last thing to go over today is the architecture. So this is the reason why it's starting in Florence. And then what the rest of the chapter is going to go over, as you can see here, we're talking about the advances in architecture and engineering, the advances in painting. You might be wondering what that means. We'll get to that later. Advances in sculpture and advances in literature as well. So and mathematics and science. So I want to take our time and really dig deep into these. So let's talk about architecture And then tomorrow we'll talk about the painting and the sculpture and literature and the science if we have enough time. Okay, so the architecture. Italy, as you have, as I've been saying, it's starting to have a lot of wealth. Money is there, and people wanted to celebrate that through buildings, as simple as that may be. And architecture in the past, the ones that really did a great job were the Romans and the Greeks. So you can even just type it in to Google here. I forgot how to spell architecture here. Architecture, right? And Roman architecture is known for a couple of things: the columns and the arches. As you can see here in the Colosseum, these are the arches, right? And the simplicity in terms of, these are very mathematical shapes. We have triangles, you have rectangles, and it puts together to create huge buildings that even today, like, okay, so these are Roman buildings. We take our famous White House in the United States, right? And that looks pretty Roman. And this is no accident. I need a better picture here of the White House. Yeah, so like, look at, there's your columns, there's your arches, there's your triangle. I mean, it's not like we invented it and because we thought it was good. We created this White House because it was based on the Roman architecture. And so Florence and the rest of Italy will start to do that as well. The real noticeable thing that they were able to accomplish was the dome. A dome had been created earlier, not to the extent of the size you see here, which is the dome of the Duomo de Santa Maria di Fiore in Italy. In fact, what's really interesting is, if you read this in the chapter, it'll go over, is that the roof is actually added later. They had all of this part down, and again, you see this triangle, you see arches here, you see columns. It's Roman based, and then they left the dome unfinished, and it took some perfect mathematics to actually get the dome to stand up and not fall, right? Because there's nothing supporting the dome underneath these arches. It's all empty space. And so you look up from the ground here all the way up. It's just, there's no big bar or anything supporting it. It's simply an arch on equal sides with a load bearing at the precise location that it needs to be. These are called the hoists. I'm sorry, these are the arches, and they were used or created by hoists, which are mechanical devices that put them up. And it really is a feat of perfection, because if anything is off, whether it be here at the base or at the top, or the angles don't match exactly, the weight will not transfer, and you actually won't get this to stand up. So this is created in 1436 and is still standing to this day. You can still go and see it when you visit Florence, as you can see there. And Florence today isn't a huge city. It's not like an LA or New York, but it's large enough. And this today, even 500 years later, is still clearly the most dramatic part of the town, as you can see. Really awesome city. This is where the statue of David is as well, and we'll get into that when we get to the sculpture. This is where that is still housed to this day. So anyway, I'm going to stop there for today. We will go over the second part of the chapter. The second part of the chapter tomorrow. I know I'm a little bit behind, so I'm going to kind of make up for it tomorrow. If you went to the Zoom chat, you already got this lesson pretty much in its entirety, but really we didn't have everybody in the class. It's not fair to just skip over that. So that's kind of where we're at today. Tomorrow we'll go over the rest of the chapter, and then we'll discuss how we're going to be doing your deep dive into one of those main areas. I'll put the link in here today too if you wanted to read and move forward. I think this is a really interesting chapter for everybody. There's something here for everybody. So please feel free to read that before any of the lectures that we go over this week. And other than that, that's going to do it. So stay safe, stay indoors, and I will see you tomorrow.